When my mother looked me dead in the eyes at the reading of her will and said, "You're worthless just like your father," I thought that was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. The worst moment came 3 days later when I discovered my father had been worth more than my mother ever knew, and he'd let her destroy his reputation to protect her pride. My name is Dalton Reeves. I'm 42 years old, and I restore furniture in a shop in Queens that barely pays the rent. My mother, Francine Reeves, died with $38 million to her name. She built a real estate empire by stepping on anyone who got in her way, including my father. My twin sisters, Bianca and Porsche, they got everything. Every property, every stock, every luxury item, all gone, handed to them with smiles and champagne. And me? I inherited a dusty briefcase no bigger than a shoebox, hidden in the corner of my father's old study. My first thought was, this has to be a joke. Inside, however, was one sheet of paper, yellowed and fragile, with a phone number scrawled in pencil. No instructions, no address, just a single number. At first I ignored it. What could a phone number possibly mean? But then I remembered my father's quiet warnings, how he used to say, "Not all treasures are obvious, Dalton. Some are hidden in plain sight." That tiny piece of paper, almost overlooked, might be the key to everything my sisters thought they had stolen. I held that number in my hand, my heart racing, wondering if it could really change the course of my life. And I promise you, by the time I dialed it, nothing would ever be the same. Before I go on, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories of betrayal, inheritance, and revenge. The morning after the will reading, I sat alone in my tiny Queens apartment, staring at the dusty briefcase that was supposed to be my inheritance. While Bianca and Porsche were celebrating their newfound wealth with champagne brunches and designer shopping sprees, I had a shoebox-sized relic and one cryptic phone number. I couldn't make sense of it. Was this a cruel joke by my mother? Or a last-minute message from my father? I thought about my father constantly during those first few hours. A man of quiet pride, he had never flaunted wealth. He worked tirelessly, built connections, and quietly accumulated assets while my mother took credit for the empire in public. My sisters believed they had won. They thought that by cutting me out, they had claimed everything my father had built. They were wrong. The briefcase itself was unremarkable. Scuffed leather, brass clasps, and the faint smell of aged paper. I lifted the lid, half expecting it to be empty. Inside was a small stack of old photographs, a few personal letters, and the single sheet of paper with that phone number. No instructions, no explanations. Just a number that seemed insignificant until I considered my father's habit of leaving subtle clues. He always believed that the people who deserved to uncover his secrets would follow the trail, no matter how hidden it was. I spent the next few hours retracing my father's history, calling old acquaintances and business partners under the guise of casual conversation. Every lead circled back to whispers about a hidden investment, a forgotten asset, and a trust fund that had never been publicly disclosed. And then it hit me. The briefcase wasn't a joke. It was a test. My father had left me a path to uncover what my sisters thought was theirs by right. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I picked up the phone and dialed the number. The line clicked on the other side. A voice, calm yet deliberate, answered, "Dalton Reeves?" My pulse quickened. How did they know I would call? The voice continued, instructing me to meet at a location I would never have found on my own. Before I packed my bag, I looked out the window at the city skyline. My life as a small-time furniture restorer was about to collide with secrets that had been buried for decades. I knew one thing. This journey would expose betrayal, hidden fortune, and truths my sisters could never have imagined. And I want to know from you. Where are you watching this story from? Comment below, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable tales of inheritance, secrets, and revenge. With determination and a mix of fear and excitement, I grabbed the briefcase and my coat. This was the first step into a world my father had left behind. One that promised wealth, danger, and the ultimate test of trust. I had no idea that the next days would completely change my life, and the number in that faded sheet of paper was the key. The location my father's mysterious contact gave me was an old warehouse on the outskirts of Manhattan, a place that looked abandoned to anyone else. I drove through the dim streets, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Every honking taxi, every flickering streetlight seemed amplified, as if the city itself was warning me to turn back, but I couldn't. The briefcase, the phone number, and my father's subtle clues had me committed. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. A single desk lamp illuminated a man sitting behind a table, his face obscured by shadows. Dalton Reeves, he said calmly without rising. Your father left instructions for you. He knew your sisters would never look for this, and he knew you had the patience to follow the trail. I stepped forward, clutching the briefcase. What is all this? My voice trembled slightly, betraying my mixture of anger and excitement. The man leaned forward and handed me a folder. Inside were documents, deeds, and bank statements, evidence of a network of hidden properties, offshore accounts, and investments that had been accumulating quietly for decades. The total value? Far beyond what my mother had let anyone know, easily surpassing $38 million. I felt a rush of vindication. My sisters thought they had it all, but they had never bothered to ask questions, to explore the truth. They had only taken what was handed to them, and now, for the first time, I had the opportunity to claim what my father had left for me, hidden and secure. The man gave me instructions on how to access the accounts, revealing passwords, security questions, and a series of cryptic notes my father had left behind. It was clear my father had gone to great lengths to protect his secrets from my mother and sisters. He had trusted me, and only me, to uncover them. As I left the warehouse, I felt both exhilarated and wary. The path ahead was dangerous, not just financially, but emotionally. My sisters were ruthless, and if they caught wind of my discovery, they would stop at nothing to prevent me from claiming what was rightfully mine. I knew I had to move carefully, meticulously, and without revealing any hint of what I had found. And here's a question for you. If you were in my shoes and discovered your father's secret fortune while your siblings had taken everything, what would you do first? Comment below, I want to see your strategies. That night, I spread the documents across my small apartment floor, tracing connections between accounts, properties, and old business partners. It was overwhelming, but thrilling. Every hidden asset I uncovered felt like a small victory, a silent statement that my sisters hadn't won. Not yet. By dawn, I had a plan forming in my mind. Step by step, I would reclaim my father's fortune, expose my sister's greed, and ensure that every person who had underestimated me learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The first step in my plan was to secure the most valuable properties before my sisters even realized I had discovered anything. I had traced hidden accounts linked to my father's name, secret investments, offshore holdings, and properties that had been quietly managed through anonymous trusts. The complexity was staggering, but every detail was a clue my father had left for me. I began by visiting a nondescript office in Brooklyn, one of the holding companies my father had set up decades ago. The receptionist barely looked up as I signed in, and I smiled to myself. Perfect, I thought. Stealth and subtlety are key. Inside, I met with the manager, presenting documentation my father had left behind. Each paper, each notarized signature was a key to unlocking more of the hidden fortune. Step by step, I was unraveling a puzzle that my sisters had ignored in their greed. By midweek, I had control over several properties, commercial buildings, rental units, and a few luxury apartments in Manhattan. The thrill of seeing my father's empire slowly come back under my name was intoxicating. But I also knew my sisters would not let this go unanswered. Bianca and Porsche had a history of ruthless manipulation. They were smart, cunning, and utterly convinced they had beaten me. I had to stay 2 steps ahead at all times. As I worked late into the night in my tiny Queens apartment, I found myself reflecting on my father's wisdom. He had left this challenge deliberately, not just to test my ability to reclaim his fortune, but to teach me patience, strategy, and the value of calculated action. I realized then that this journey wasn't just about money. It was about proving that persistence, intelligence, and loyalty to family principles could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. I knew I had to act fast, so I devised a plan to approach my sisters indirectly. I began gathering evidence of their past financial maneuvers, shady real estate deals, secret transfers, and instances where they had overstepped legal boundaries. Each document was another piece of ammunition, and I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced in years. Here's a question for you. If you were in my position and discovered your siblings had taken everything, how would you approach confronting them? Comment below and share your strategy. As the days passed, the tension grew. I was no longer the overlooked brother. I was a quiet force, reclaiming an empire that had been mine by blood. Every time I secured a property, my confidence grew, and I realized something crucial. My father's fortune wasn't just money. It was a test of character, intelligence, and resilience. By the end of that week, I had positioned myself to reclaim the largest part of my father's estate, all while keeping my sisters in the dark. The storm was approaching, and when it hit, it would leave no doubt about who had truly inherited the legacy. The next days were a whirlwind of strategy and caution. I knew my sisters would eventually notice the shift in control, and when they did, they would come after me with everything they had. Bianca and Porsche had been groomed by our mother to dominate, to take what they wanted without hesitation. But now, armed with my father's hidden secrets and the briefcase that had started it all, I was ready to play the game on my terms. I began reaching out to some of my father's old associates, the quiet men and women who had been loyal to him, even when my mother tried to claim all credit. They were skeptical at first, unsure why I had suddenly appeared after years of staying in the shadows. But when I showed them the briefcase, the documents, and the meticulously detailed notes left by my father, their expressions changed. They realized I wasn't just a lost son, I was the rightful heir, the one who had the patience and cunning to uncover the truth. With their guidance, I started maneuvering financially, consolidating hidden accounts, reclaiming assets, and quietly securing properties before my sisters could even react. Every move was calculated. Every decision had to be precise. One wrong step, and everything could unravel. Yet, it wasn't just about money. The emotional weight of betrayal hung over me. My sisters had taken everything my mother had left them, and they didn't even know the extent of their arrogance. I thought about the years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, and I realized something. Revenge isn't just about taking back what's yours. It's about proving your worth, silently and strategically, so that those who doubted you finally see your strength. During this process, I kept my audience in mind, the people following my story. If you're watching this, comment below where you're tuning in from. I want to know who's witnessing this journey of betrayal, strategy, and ultimate revenge. And make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will leave you shocked. The plan became clear. I would expose their greed, reclaim the wealth, and secure my father's legacy, all without ever appearing rash or desperate. I started mapping out their movements, tracking their finances, and identifying the weak points in their empire. Slowly, the empire my mother had left to them was beginning to crumble, and I was standing at the center, calm, patient, and ready. By the end of that week, I had successfully reclaimed half of the hidden assets, positioning myself as a silent but powerful player. Bianca and Porsche remained unaware, celebrating their perceived victory while the real game had already begun. It was exhilarating to realize that my father's foresight, combined with my determination, had turned the tables completely. And here's a question for you. If someone you thought had won everything suddenly started reclaiming it strategically, how would you react? Comment below and share your thoughts. The storm was coming, and when it hit, nothing would be the same. I had stepped out of the shadows, and the journey to reclaim my inheritance and reveal the truth about my family's greed was only getting started. By the second week, the reality of what I was doing started to hit me. This wasn't just about reclaiming wealth or exposing my sister's greed. It was about restoring balance to a legacy my father had built with years of dedication and quiet foresight. Every property I reclaimed, every account I accessed, reminded me of the depth of his planning. He hadn't just left money behind. He had left a test, a way to see who would honor his principles and who would succumb to arrogance. Working late nights in my small Queens apartment, I organized the documents, lined up my next steps, and started compiling evidence of my sister's financial misdeeds. They had made mistakes, both legally and morally, that I could leverage if necessary. But I didn't want to humiliate them unnecessarily. This was about justice, not cruelty. I wanted to prove that careful planning, patience, and intelligence could triumph over entitlement and manipulation. During this time, I reached out quietly to a few of our father's old business allies. Some were surprised to hear from me, a son who had always stayed in the background. Others, though, remembered his words. Dalton has patience. He will follow the trail. When they saw the briefcase and the notes, they realized my father had prepared me for this all along. Their support was invaluable, providing advice, confirming the authenticity of documents, and even helping me navigate legal hurdles that could have been traps set by my sisters. And I kept thinking about my audience. You watching this story unfold. Where are you watching from? Comment below and let me know. If you haven't already, subscribe, because the next steps will be even more intense. You don't want to miss how this inheritance battle escalates. The emotional toll was significant. Every time I saw Bianca or Porsche in public, every social media post flaunting what they thought was theirs, I felt a surge of anger. But I reminded myself of my father's wisdom, patience, strategy, and restraint. My sister's arrogance would be their downfall if I stayed focused. By the end of the week, I had fully reclaimed the major hidden accounts and regained control over properties previously thought lost. The feeling was indescribable. A mixture of vindication, relief, and the sober understanding of how close I had been to losing everything. My father's plan had worked. He had entrusted me with a challenge that tested my character, intelligence, and perseverance. I realized that the true impact of this journey wasn't the money alone. It was the empowerment I felt, the confidence I had gained, and the knowledge that I could navigate deception and betrayal without losing myself. The legacy of my father wasn't just financial. It was a lesson in resilience, foresight, and strategic thinking. The storm was far from over. My sisters remained unaware of how much I had uncovered, and the final confrontation was still ahead. But I was ready. Every move I had made, every account I had accessed, and every alliance I had secured had brought me closer to the moment when the full truth would be revealed. And when my father's legacy would be fully honored, the moment I had been preparing for had finally arrived. Bianca and Porsche had begun to notice discrepancies. Properties appearing under my name, accounts shifting, and subtle hints that someone was quietly reclaiming what they assumed was theirs. They were confused, suspicious, and growing desperate, but they still had no idea how deep my discovery ran. I had arranged a discreet meeting with a few key allies, former business partners of my father who had witnessed his foresight firsthand. Together, we devised a plan to reveal the truth in a way that would protect the assets, expose the greed, and ensure that justice was unmistakable. Timing was everything. The last thing I wanted was for my sisters to catch wind of my moves prematurely. The first step was legal, ensuring that every asset I reclaimed had indisputable documentation linking it to my father, and by extension, to me. Old deeds, notarized letters, and trust agreements became my arsenal. Every document I uncovered reinforced the fact that my sister's entitlement was built on assumptions and arrogance, not legal merit. Once I secured the legal framework, I began setting the stage for confrontation. I reached out to Bianca and Porsche under the guise of casual family check-ins, subtly testing their awareness and reaction. Their responses were telling. They were nervous, dismissive, and increasingly frustrated, which only confirmed the path I was on was working. This was also when I decided to engage with my audience, sharing glimpses of the strategy without revealing sensitive details. If you're watching this, comment below where you're following this story from, and make sure to subscribe for the next part. You won't believe what happens next. The tension was building, and I wanted my viewers to feel it as if they were there with me. By midweek, I had initiated the final phase, a public yet controlled revelation. Key documents were sent to trusted financial and legal contacts, making it impossible for my sisters to argue or manipulate the narrative. I had orchestrated it so that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable, not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. The climax of this stage wasn't just about winning financially. It was about proving to myself, my father, and the world that patience, intelligence, and unwavering persistence could overcome deceit and entitlement. Every move was calculated, every response anticipated. Bianca and Porsche were playing checkers while I was playing chess, following a strategy my father had implicitly taught me through decades of preparation and subtle clues. By the end of this week, I had not only reclaimed the majority of the hidden fortune, but also ensured that my sister's credibility and leverage were weakened, without me lifting a finger in overt confrontation. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of victory, earned, strategic, and inevitable. Even though I had reclaimed most of my father's hidden fortune, I knew the battle wasn't over. Bianca and Porsche were smart, and though they were blindsided, they were also resourceful. I needed to anticipate their next moves while solidifying my position. Every phone call, every email, and every meeting had to be calculated. One misstep and the empire my father had protected for decades could slip away again. I started tracking their activity carefully, noticing patterns and weaknesses. Porsche had become increasingly aggressive in her investments, often overextending and creating vulnerabilities. Bianca, meanwhile, was obsessed with public appearances, flaunting wealth that wasn't entirely hers to show. Both sisters were ignoring the subtle warning signs, and I realized I had a unique advantage: invisibility. They assumed I was powerless, a background figure, and that mistake would cost them dearly. To strengthen my position, I met with one of my father's longtime financial advisors. He confirmed that with the right steps, I could consolidate control over the remaining assets without triggering suspicion. He also explained how the timing of public disclosure could ensure my sisters had no opportunity to legally challenge the transfer. My father's foresight had left me a map, and I was finally able to follow it confidently. During these preparations, I kept my audience engaged. If you're watching this story unfold, comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. And make sure to subscribe, because the next steps involve moves you won't see coming. Sharing my journey not only reminds me of how far I've come, but also gives others a glimpse of how strategy, patience, and determination can turn betrayal into triumph. Next, I had to secure key evidence of my sister's attempts to manipulate and claim assets unfairly. I began assembling detailed records of their financial misdeeds, hidden transfers, inflated property claims, and misleading statements to banks and business partners. Each piece of evidence was another weapon in my arsenal, strengthening my position and ensuring that any future confrontation would be indisputable. At the same time, I was taking steps to protect myself personally. My sisters had proven ruthless, and I knew they could retaliate if they suspected my advances. Careful communication, strategic meetings, and discreet legal moves were all part of my approach. I wasn't just reclaiming money. I was safeguarding my father's legacy, my future, and my own sense of justice. By the end of the week, the situation had shifted dramatically. My sisters were increasingly frantic, making errors and revealing cracks in their previously confident demeanor. Meanwhile, I remained calm, methodical, and in control. The empire that had seemed lost was now coming together piece by piece, and the final stages of this journey were fast approaching. And here's a question for you. If someone you trusted left behind hidden opportunities that only you could uncover, would you take the risk? Comment below and share your thoughts. The storm was nearing its peak, and when it finally hit, it would leave no doubt about who had truly inherited my father's legacy. I was ready to finish what my father had started and prove that strategy, patience, and intelligence always win in the end. By this point, the tide had fully turned. My sisters, once so confident in their assumed victory, were beginning to crumble under pressure, though they didn't yet know why. Every asset I had quietly reclaimed, every account I had secured, and every property now under my control was a reminder of their arrogance and underestimation. They had assumed I was powerless, an afterthought in the family legacy. They were wrong. I continued to work methodically, ensuring that each step I took was protected legally and financially. The evidence I had collected of their past manipulations became increasingly critical, not just for reclaiming assets, but for reinforcing the truth of my father's foresight. Bianca and Porsche had never imagined someone could play the long game so strategically, and that advantage allowed me to remain several moves ahead. At the same time, I wanted to involve my audience in this journey. If you're watching this story, comment below where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. Following along helps me stay connected to viewers who understand the stakes, and it's a reminder that strategy and patience often triumph over greed. I began carefully reaching out to key stakeholders, business partners, legal advisors, and financial institutions without alerting my sisters. Every meeting reinforced my control and solidified my claim to what was rightfully mine. I was reclaiming more than money. I was reclaiming respect, dignity, and a sense of justice that had been denied to me for decades. Emotionally, this process was both exhausting and exhilarating. Every small victory brought a sense of satisfaction I had never experienced before. Each property or account I secured was a silent message. Underestimating me had been a grave mistake. But I reminded myself to stay disciplined. The final reveal, when my sisters would finally realize the depth of their oversight, had to be flawless. As I prepared for that moment, I reflected on my father's lessons, the patience he instilled, the subtle clues he left, and the importance of measured action. His legacy was never just about wealth. It was about integrity, strategy, and understanding the value of foresight. I realized that by following his guidance, I was honoring him in the most profound way possible. By the end of this week, I had fully reclaimed all remaining hidden assets. My sister's empire, once built on assumptions and entitlement, was now mine in both legal and strategic terms. And when they finally discovered the truth, they would understand, just as I had right, that patience, intelligence, and persistence always triumph over arrogance and greed. This is where the story takes a final turn. I had reclaimed what was mine, secured my father's legacy, and proven to myself and everyone watching that strategy beats impulse, and patience beats pride. The journey wasn't just about money. It was about justice, resilience, and the power of staying true to the lessons my father had left behind. The moment of revelation came quietly, yet it hit like a storm. Bianca and Porsche had just realized the extent of what had been reclaimed. Their confident smiles vanished, replaced by shock, disbelief, and then anger. The empire they thought was theirs was now under my control. Every property, every account, every hidden asset. They had underestimated me, and the consequences were undeniable. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The quiet satisfaction of seeing justice unfold in its own way was far more powerful than any confrontation could have been. My father's foresight had guided me, and I had followed it faithfully. The power of patience, strategy, and careful observation had turned what could have been despair into triumph. Even more than the money, the true victory was in reclaiming my father's legacy and proving my own worth. I had learned the depth of my resilience, the strength of my strategic thinking, and the value of acting with both intelligence and integrity. Bianca and Porsche's greed had been their downfall, and I had emerged not only as the rightful heir, but as the person my father always knew I could be. And here's a final question for you. If you were in my shoes, having been overlooked and underestimated for years, what would you have done differently? Comment below and let me know. As for me, I stepped forward to secure the future, not just for myself, but as a tribute to my father's vision. The briefcase that had seemed ordinary, the phone number that had seemed insignificant, and the hidden documents that had seemed like secrets all became tools of empowerment. And in the end, justice was not about revenge, but about honoring what truly mattered: legacy, integrity, and the wisdom of those who guide us even after they're gone.